Okay, everybody, welcome to your first content rubric explanation for interdisciplinary projects between language arts and social studies. We're going to look here first at the content rubric for Unit 2A and go through the specifics so that you have a very clear understanding as to what you are expected to have in your project. Now, the one thing I want to point out here first is that this looks a little bit complicated, but we will break it down to simplify it so that you can understand exactly what we are looking for. Also note that this same rubric will be used to grade all different project types on the content. There will be separate rubrics used, however, if you're completing a paper, a presentation, or the creative representation. Now let's break this down into different parts. First, let's talk about the different criteria that you must include in your project, whether it is a paper, presentation, or a creative representation. First, we're going to look at leadership. So what you need to talk about here is how leadership helps you to win a war, because the big question for this unit is, what does it take to win a war? So we're going to look at leadership. This could focus on a lot of different things. Second will be motivation. How does motivation impact you winning a war, and why is it important in winning a war? And secondly, resources. How are they important? You will be graded separately on each of these three sections. Now, if it's a paper, it's going to be a clear-cut body paragraph for each. However, in the creative representation, this can definitely be done very differently. In a presentation, it will probably end up being a little bit more like a paper in terms of a natural, very sequential layout. Now, the next thing, let's get back here so I can get rid of my pen. The next thing we want to look at here are the points. What are the points that we can earn on each section? Now I want to just show you the maximum here off the bat is 5 points. And I apologize for my non-circular circle there. But the maximum amount of points is 5 points. In order to get a 5 out of 5, what you need to have for each section are multiple strong and accurate supporting details, meaning this. Let's say for this first section, you want to talk about leadership. You're going to need to include at least 2 specific examples. So let's say you want to include George Washington and Thomas Paine. What you're going to need to do is introduce George Washington, and I'm just going to give you a little bit here just to give you a general idea. Introduce him, so a quick little intro on George Washington, and then you also need to add in a specific detail or fact that is going to help to really support why George Washington was a very important person in terms of leadership and helping to win a war. So, George Washington, same thing can be done for Thomas Paine. So we're going to introduce and then give a specific fact and detail. Specifics are the key here, so make sure you have some specific support there, and that will earn you all of your credit in terms of this. Second, we have a clear connection to the essential question. Oops, excuse me, I left out the question part there. But you get the idea here. In other words, what you need to make sure you're doing is answering what does it take to win a war. One thing that has happened in the past is people have gone on and talked a lot about leadership. However, they didn't really connect it back to winning a war. They just say, oh, George Washington was a great leader because he did this and that. But it didn't really help to prove that it was to win a war. And that's what you're really trying to do here, is support the idea that leadership is a very important key to winning a war. Make sure you do that. And lastly, multiple references. Now, for references, this will change throughout the year. Early on, what we're going to require for this first project is simply that you have 2 references for each criteria here on the left. So for leadership, you want to have 2 separate references. One could be the book, and another one could be an article that we post and we provide for you on Blended Schools. Now, how do you use a reference? What you're going to do here, when we said below that you need a specific detail, and if you can see I'm kind of pointing down to where I have a GW written, we want to have a specific detail about George Washington. If you're getting that information, this specific detail that supports and proves that George Washington was a great leader and helped to win the war, you need to show us where you got that from. We will provide you in class on the details as to how we want you to cite it, but it's actually going to be really simple what we do right now. It's not going to be anything really formal like you would do in a typical MLA report. We're going to start off very simply here, and at the end of sentences, you're just going to put a number to the specific reference that we provide. Again, this will be explained more in detail in class, so don't worry about that too much right away. Now, let's clear up the board here again. So we can be a little bit more neat. So that's what we have for a 5. What's the difference between a 5 and a 4? The biggest difference is you're only going to have 1 reference included in order for you to drop down to a 4. So still multiple strong and supporting accurate details, still a clear connection to our essential question, but now we're down to 1 reference included. So let's say you mentioned George Washington and Thomas Paine. Maybe you have a good reference and a lot of good details on George Washington. We really don't need to have too many. However, for Thomas Paine, you just list something very generic and you don't have any references included. That would drop you down to a 4. To get dropped down to a 3, what would happen is this. You would still have your one reference included, as was at the 4 level. However, now you have no clear connection to the essential question. In other words, you have good information on leadership, but you did not connect it back to what does it take to win a war. And that's going to bring you down to a 3. So you're basically, what we're saying is that you're showing us some good information. However, you didn't put that information in the right context, and that's why you're losing points. Now, if you do not have enough information here, let's say you leave out and you don't have any references and you don't have strong supporting details, you're going to be given what is an unsatisfactory grade, which means it is a 0. In other words, you have to redo this section before you're going to get a grade. So it's not a flat out 0, it's a 0 for now. You need to fix it. And the point of this is we want to make sure that everybody gets the key concepts and does what is needed so you can show us you can do these skills that are essential, and that's why they're on here. There are skills that we feel are extremely important for this unit, whether it be social studies or language arts. And then you'll have to redo that though. Okay. Now let's move on and say, what could we include in the different sections? For leadership, first, there are 3 little criteria that we have down here in the bottom, if you see where I am. And we could be looking at leadership from a lot of different perspectives. We could say military leadership. You could say emotional leadership, trying to get people really excited and motivated. And you could also say governmental, and people who are really instrumental in helping to lead the people and to do like the behind the scenes type of work, like Benjamin Franklin with his role in getting forward and support in this war. Okay, so some other people we have down here, we have George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and more. The reality is you're not tied into those people. You can use whoever you would like. For instance, one of the references included is from Nathan Hale, who isn't on this list. So we provided the references so you can look them up and see why they're important. But nonetheless, that's who you could use for leadership as a little starting point. Second, we have motivation here. It could be motivation from a lot of different perspectives. It could be reason to fight, declaring independence, saying, hey, this is our specific purpose. Gaining support of the people. Thomas Paine with his pamphlets like Common Sense. This gained a lot of support given the fact that it was read by so many people in America. And boosting morale and trying to keep people positive and supporting the war. The Crisis by Thomas Paine is another one you could include. Again, there's more that you more that you can include. And one thing that's listed here in the bottom is this idea of fighting for freedom versus a paycheck. That might be slang in general that you want to include here, and you can definitely find information on the internet about that as well, and specifically in the resources that we're providing. And then third, we have resources here. Resources, we could talk a lot about a lot of different things. We could talk about goods. We could talk about people. What we're going to look at here is this idea of possessing goods and people, and beyond possessing them, also managing them. So in other words, yeah, that's great, you have all these resources, but can you actually get them to your soldiers? Do they have them available to fight and to support them in the war? Because when we're talking about what does it take to win a war, you need a lot of different things in order to win the battles physically, and that's really what this is looking at. Some things you might want to include, and this is looking down at the bottom left here. We have foreign support, knowledge of the land, innovation, war tactics, and more. There are a lot of different things you can really look at in specific. Just make sure that you include specific details for that. So wrapping up, this is our first content project here, our first content rubric project for Unit 2A. The main idea here is what does it take to win a war, and hopefully that helped to clear up some of your confusion potentially both about the rubric and about what information you can include.